This is a 2.5 hour video. Okay, we'll put this back over here.
Well, folks, Milton Friedman once said that inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. And yet there are a lot of people who are suggesting today that really inflation is going to be a result not of printing money or spending too much money. It's going to be the result of Donald Trump's economic policy. I think this is
we need to take the macro econ course. The idea that inflation can just be boiled down to monetary stuff is like, it's so simplistic that it's not even like even if it might be true in the strict sense, it's just so simplistic that it's not even worth saying. Like,
this is wishcasting. We'll talk about it in a second. First, if you have not heard, our best deal of the year is happening right now. Get 50% off new annual memberships, no code needed. Go to dailywire.com/Black Friday and join right now. So President Trump is currently riding high. His approval ratings are in the high 50s, low 60s. People generally approve of his transition team's plans. They like what they are seeing. And so that means it is now indicative that the media are trying to crush his sort of economic dreams. The idea is being promulgated by the media is that inflation, which ate up the Biden administration, is now going to plague Donald Trump. Now, this is kind of funny because we were told by this exact same media that inflation was not going to be a factor for Joe Biden when he took office. We were told that modern monetary theory, Elizabeth Warren's bizarre and strange theory about economics, he could...
Elizabeth Warren invented MMT? I feel like MMT, what a wacky relabeling. I feel like MMT was more of a thing of like the weirdo libertarian, like the actual libertarians. Maybe? No, that wouldn't make sense because where did MMT, who were the main proponents of it? Why do I associate with libertarians? That wouldn't make sense though because libertarians don't like printing money, no? Lefty progressives? I feel like it was the Keynesian economics and then from there, was it an offshoot of it? I don't know. MMT was always like retarded shit. It was the child of Warren Mosler. Yeah, was he a libertarian or am I just making this up? I'm thinking of a Warren guy who was, or did I talk to this guy? Oh, no, wait, I think Rage Pope talked to this guy. I don't remember. Whatever, okay.
Endlessly serial, Elizabeth Warren's bizarre and strange theory about economics. You could endlessly spend money without ever inflating prices, without ever inflating away people's savings, that was possibly true, that we could just keep spending money until the end of time, and inflation would not result. And then, of course, inflation did result. Well, now the claim is that Donald Trump's economic policies...
Hold on. This is such an unbelievable thing. I'm just so curious. When we talk about inflation, are we going to do a 23-minute video without mentioning COVID? Like, is he just going to mention like COVID stimulus, and then are we never going to actually mention COVID? Are we just completely mind wiping that COVID ever happened and that there was no COVID, and so any inflation like that was just we're just mind wiping that, like.
Are going to produce Trumpflation, that Trumpflation is coming. Now, the pitch on this is basically that Donald Trump is pursuing a series of policies that are going to lead to price increases. Those policies would be, in order, tariffs, tax cuts, and deportations. This is a case made by Alan Blinder over at the Wall Street Journal. He's a professor of economics and public affairs over at Princeton. He was also a member of the Federal Reserve from 94 to 96. He says, 3 such policies received the most attention during the campaign: tariffs, tax cuts, and mass deportation of illegal immigrants.
Okay, so tariffs would lead to an increase of price definitionally. That's the goal of a tariff, is to increase the price on something so something else becomes competitive. So if we think of an increase in price as inflation, then that's definitionally true, tautologically true. Deportation means that you are decreasing the available supply of labor. When the supply of a thing goes down, then the demand for the thing goes up, meaning if we shift the equilibrium, it's going to shift up on cost. So labor will go up. If the cost of producing a thing goes up, then the thing itself will go up. So that should, in theory, produce more upward pressure on prices. And then the third thing is tax cuts. Well, by Ben's own definition, more money being spent by the government, meaning if you do a tax cut, but you don't pair it with a spending cut, definitionally should also lead to inflation, right? So all 3 of these things, I'm so curious, does Ben escape every single one leading to inflation? Let's find out. Oh boy. Welcome to Magician Economics 101. Here we go.
Legal immigrants. He says, no matter how many times Mr. Trump denies that tariffs are discriminatory sales taxes, discriminating against imported goods is their purpose. Sales taxes raise prices for consumers. Now, this is true. It is true that tariffs raise prices to consumers. That's literally what they're designed to do.
Oh, good job. He understands this. Nice.
Tariffs protect particular domestic industries against foreign competition. And what that really does, that's nice speak for, it raises prices on consumers in order to benefit one particular class of producers. So let's say that you are steel.
Nice. Okay. Whew. Wow. Okay. He hasn't forgotten. He hasn't changed his tune on this because he's had this. This is consistently. This is true. This is what this is what tariffs are supposed to do. Yeah.
Producer in the United States. And let's say that China is importing steel at a rate that is much lower. You put tariffs on the Chinese steel, and now it is cheaper for Americans to buy the American steel than the Chinese steel, but that's at a price that is higher than they otherwise would have paid. So the domestic steel manufacturers are very happy, but the consumers of steel are very unhappy. The thing about tariffs is that like most government policies, they have a set of very specific beneficiaries and a set of extremely diffuse victims.
True.
And there's a lot of government policy.
Yes.
Is that the damage done to the broader public is mild to moderate, and the benefit to a very, very selective class is very high. But that's not exactly what Donald Trump is doing with regard to tariffs. What Donald Trump is doing with regard to tariffs is something different. To understand.
Oh, no. Oh, okay. So he actually has I'll even say, as somebody with no econ background, a relatively sophisticated understanding of tariffs, okay? That's true. It's a localized benefit. So for instance, if I tariff a guy on making cars or all cars or whatever, it's a localized benefit to car producers, and then it's a diffuse detriment. Everybody around the country suffers a little bit because now people have to spend more money on cars, so cars cost more, and they have to spend less money on other things necessarily because they're spending more on cars, so now other people that produce goods and services are making less money as well, right? Okay, so he has that. Okay, now what's he going to say? Is he going to say Donald Trump is threatening tariffs, but he's using them as leverage to negotiate other things, so he's not actually going to do them? What are we saying here, I guess?
Donald Trump is doing with regard to tariffs. What Donald Trump is doing with regard to tariffs is something different. To understand what he's doing with regard to tariffs, you have to understand the past of Donald Trump. So Donald Trump, for example, threatened incredibly high tariffs on both Canada and Mexico in the middle of his first administration. He was ripping on NAFTA. He suggested that he was going to scrap NAFTA entirely. He was going to increase trade barriers against Mexico and Canada. What was he actually doing? Well, what he was actually doing is just rewriting NAFTA in favor of the United States. The result of the threat of tariffs was the so-called USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement.
So my understanding for the USMCA, so firstly, that is true that we changed NAFTA to the USMCA. I would have to go back and look it up for sure. My understanding is that the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement was basically just NAFTA with slightly more favorable provisions to the United States. That's it. It wasn't like a whole new trade agreement. US-Mexico-Canada agreement. What's this it? Like it increased like costs a little bit for final assembly of cars like outside of the country. But for the most part, this wasn't like a radical change. I got a work permit under the USMCA in 2023 and all the paperwork still says NAFTA. Okay, yeah. I don't think it was like a radical change in our trade agreement. It was just like slightly more favorable towards the United States. Oh, it's sometimes characterized as NAFTA 2.0 since it largely maintains or updates the provisions of its predecessor. Yeah, okay. But all right.
And the changes to NAFTA were somewhat moderate. So, for example, the USMCA required that 75% of a vehicle's parts.
Oh, shit. Somebody posted this. Yeah, key differences. So like 62.5% of the vehicle parts must be made in US, Mexico, or Canada. And now it's like 75% of vehicle parts must be made in US, Mexico, or Canada. Things like these basically, yeah.
Parts be made in Mexico, Canada, or the United States. That was an increase from 62.5% in order to remain free from tariffs. It has a moderate change, and it helped the American economy. 62.5 be made in the USMCA required that 75% of a vehicle's parts be made in Mexico, Canada, or the United States. That was an increase from 62.5% in order to remain free from tariffs. It has a moderate change, and it helped the American economy slightly, probably.
Wait, Destiny should learn micro. Macro is just larger micro. Micro is so much more fun. Game theory, rational choice, behavioral models. My understanding is macroeconomics has basically nothing to do with microeconomics, but I could be totally wrong there. Like, I don't know what the fuck you could ever possibly learn in a microeconomic class that would like help explain like central banks or monetary policy or stuff like, I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, I haven't taken like a specialized, I've only done like basic econ college, like seminar things a long time ago from audiobooks. So I could be wrong on that.
It also meant that labor laws had to be strengthened in Mexico, so Mexico couldn't use its lax labor laws, things like child labor, in order to undercut American prices. It gave dairy farmers more market access. So there used to be a lot of tariffs on American dairy farmers going into Mexican markets or Canadian markets, and those went away. So the USMCA kept tariffs at zero and opened the Canadian market to U.S. dairy, poultry, and eggs. Right? So basically, Donald Trump used the threat of tariffs to leverage benefits away from the Canadians and the Mexicans. And this is historically what Donald Trump has done with regard to tariffs. And the way you can tell that this is how people are looking at Donald Trump's tariff policy is because the markets have responded quite well to Donald Trump's actual economic proposals. You can see, for example, that President Trump is now hiring as a top member of his transition Kevin Hassett to the National Economic Council in the White House. Kevin Hassett is, by nature, a very, very pro-markets guy. He was, of course, part of the first Trump administration. Hassett will head the National Economic Council, and markets love it already. President Trump says, as chair of my Council of Economic Advisors, Kevin played a crucial role in helping design and pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. Hassett, his work is excellent. He's worked for the American Enterprise Institute previously. And again, he is seen by the markets as a pro-market guy. So you have to understand that what Donald Trump is attempting to do with tariffs is to leverage wins out of a wide variety of American enemies. That is the goal here. As far as tax cuts, Now, there are a lot of people who suggested that
Oh, so that's how we're going to... My understanding is some of Trump's tariffs like severely damage some U.S. industry though, right? Like I think the U.S. government bails out, is it soybean farmers or whatever? I've already read this. 2020. The Trump tariff aid to farmers costs more than U.S. nuclear forces. I don't know where you compare these two things, but the Trump administration gave more taxpayer dollars to farmers harmed by the administration's trade policies than the federal government spends each year building ships for the Navy or maintaining America's nuclear arsenal, according to a new report. National Foundation for American Policy Analysis concluded the spending on farmers was also higher than the annual budgets of several government agencies. The amount of money raises questions about the strategy of imposing tariffs and permitting the use of taxpayer money to shield policymakers from the consequences of their actions, according to the analysis. So our State Department's budget, I guess, was $26 billion, and the aid sent to farmers to compensate them for damages done by tariffs was $28 billion. What bullshit? So my tax money is going towards paying these fucking farmers to protect them from the consequences of Trump tariffs? I wonder how this money gets appropriated. That's kind of bullshit. But, ooh, actually, you know what? That's a... Stop using tax money to compensate losers from Trump executive actions, e.g. tariffs. Why is Ben Shapiro calling Canada and Mexico enemies? Is he? I don't know. Every country is our enemy under Trump.
that is the goal here. As far as tax cuts, now, there are a lot of people who suggested that the 2017 Trump tax cuts were going to lead to inflation. That didn't actually happen. Why? Because it turns out that allowing people to keep their own money is not the same thing as simply pumping government money into the system.
Okay, let's hear how he explains this. Okay, I so want to hear this. Tell me, please.
Allowing people to keep their own money, American consumers and American investors act with actual rationality with regard to their own spending and investments, which means they don't just blow money into the economy willy-nilly.
They absolutely do, but okay.
If there's a tax cut, people tend to use that money to not only pay off their bills in a responsible fashion, but they also tend to make economic decisions that help them and their families, as opposed to the government, because the way the government spends money is it finds...
Wait, what?
Who use that money to not only pay off their bills in a responsible fashion, but they also tend to make economic decisions that help them and their families.
What do you think economic decisions to help them and their families means? What is he saying here? I don't even know. This is what I was talking about before when I'm saying, like, give me a question, I'll try to spitball you an answer. What a worthless statement. They use money to make economic decisions to help their families? Okay.
As opposed to the government, because the way the government spends money is it finds particular constituencies that it likes, and then it throws money at those constituencies. Special projects that government wants that don't have to be profitable. They can be absolutely profit neutral or negative and just tosses money at them. And that can be absolutely projects that government wants that don't have to be profitable. They can be absolutely profit neutral or negative and just tosses money at them. And that creates artificial inflation in areas where there is no concomitant productivity.
I mean, like, while that's kind of true, but it kind of depends. I mean, like, there are some things that the government spends money on that make money for the government, though. So, for instance, obviously, investing in the IRS to collect taxes is a good way to do it. Also, there are multipliers in dollars spent in, say, one thing that I remember reading in the past has to do with birth control. If the government or state governments, I think in California I was reading this, that there's a multiplier effect for every dollar spent in birth control. It's like $18 saved or whatever, and if you don't have like a child, in terms of how much money the state would have to spend taking care of it or providing welfare or tax breaks or whatever. So there are places where the government can spend money, but it's hard to recover the costs of that. Like, there wouldn't be a profit in doing so. Like, if a private company were to give free birth control, they're not going to make money on it, but the state government can. So, the goal of every government policy is not necessarily to be profitable. There are some things that we should invest in that might be really hard to turn a profit on. But
the reality is that new products, new innovations, initially that means that people spend money on those innovations at a higher rate, and then as there's competition, the prices come down. That's what happens when you allow people to keep their own money. But that entire incentive structure is broken by government spending. So tax cuts and government spending are not remotely the same thing, and only a person who believes that all money basically comes from the government equates those two things. Me allowing you to keep...
Well, I mean, in a literal, strict sense, if we're going to be this rudimentary about it, doesn't all money kind of come from the government? Like, why do you get paid in USD and not any other currency? It's because you can pay your taxes or the government in USD because the government forces everybody to accept USD and because the government creates USD for us to circulate. I mean, like, if you want to be like super ultra strict about it, but I mean, I don't know. You could get paid in Bitcoin, I guess.
Keep your own money is not the same thing as me cutting you a check or me cutting a check to anyone else. Not the same thing remotely. Okay, finally, there's the idea that mass deportation is going to create inflation as well. But it's totally unclear exactly what that's going to look like. So in any case, Alan Blinder suggests that if you put all this together, the new Trump policies might add 2 to 3% to total inflation over 2 to 3 years.
Oh, so he just like skips. Okay. Wait, so what was his explanation? What people specifically do with the saved money? He says that they use it economically to help their family. I don't know what the fuck that means. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. And then also deporting people is just not going to happen, I guess.
Years,
So we just like skip that whole part. Jesus.
percentage point a year. Now, the real problem here is not going to be that. The real problem here is going to be if there's an attempt to push the Federal Reserve to continue to lower the interest rates. Right? That would be the real problem, because it turns out the Federal Reserve is generally the biggest driver of the national inflation rate. That and massive government spending. So at the same time that Trump is pushing all this, he of course is also pushing the so-called Department of Government Efficiency led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, there's only so much that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy can actually do in terms of cutting. Right? That doesn't mean they can't do anything. It just means that it'll be a lot tougher than people think it will be. Because if you break down the American spending initiatives, the spending as a share of gross domestic product, 14.7% of our GDP is spent on mandatory programs that are already embedded in law that Trump has said he will not touch, like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. When it comes to non-defense discretionary spending...
Wait. What? Did he just compare the percentage spent on mandatory programs from our GDP? Why would you, can somebody explain why you would compare these two numbers? I guess if you wanted to know over time, maybe, but our federal budget doesn't come from our GDP. It comes from our tax revenues.
Of our GDP is spent on share of gross domestic product, spending initiatives. The spending as a share of gross domestic product, 14.7% of our GDP is spent on mandatory programs that are already embedded in law that Trump has said he will not touch, like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Programs that are 14.7% of our GDP is spent on mandatory programs that are already embedded in law that Trump has said he will not touch.
We don't spend our GDP on these things. The government spends its money on things. I don't understand that. I don't know. I don't even know what this statement means. I have no idea. Okay.
Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. When it comes to non-defense discretionary spending, that has remained fairly consistent in terms of its spending levels since the 1960s. And defense actually represents significantly less of the American GDP spend than it did back in the 1960s. We were spending about 9% of our GDP on defense spending back in 1960. Today, we spend about 3% on our defense spending. So this kind of thing, back in 1960. Today, we spend about 9% of our GDP on defense spending. Back in 1960. Today, we spend about 3% on our defense spending. So this kind of bizarre notion that defense spending is what's eating up the budget, that is not true at all.
Well, no, wait, this is reasonable though. Tax revenues are dependent on GDP. In a tied way, but this is a dog shit comparison. Like, hold on, I'm sorry. Like,
so what exactly can they touch? That is not true at all. So that defense spending is what's eating up the budget. That on our defense spending. On defense spending back in 1960. Today we spend about 3% on our defense spending. So this kind of bizarre notion that defense spending is what's eating up the budget, that is not true.
This is a lie. I would just, this statement, I would just qualify this as a lie. To say that we spend 3% of our GDP on our defense budget is a lie. Factually, is it true? I guess kind of. But one, we don't spend our GDP. We don't spend our GDP. The government, that doesn't even make sense. Government spending is a component of GDP. This doesn't even make sense at all. Number one. Number two, when people talk about our defense budget being high, or what we spend on defense being high, we only spend 3%. That does sound really low. But my understanding, we can look it up, I believe that when we're talking about the budget of the government, the discretionary spending portion of the budget, that's like, I think 50% or more is spent on defense. That's usually what people are talking about when they say it's high. 3% to 50% is a massively different. That's an insanely stupid discretionary budget. USA 2024, 2023 was 1.7 trillion, and was defense over 1 trillion? Approximately half of the federal discretionary spending is allocated to defense. Oh, yeah, I see. Okay, it says whole box. Yeah, what a stupid, what a stupid point.
At all. So what exactly can they touch? Well, again, the list is relatively small. What remains is discretionary spending, according to the Wall Street Journal. That breaks down into two.
Yeah, why would you look at the total and compare spending of the discretionary to that? Wait, I can't tell if you're... Okay, never mind.
Main categories. The first, what remains, can they touch? Well, again, the list is relatively small. What remains is discretionary spending, according to the Wall Street Journal. That breaks down into two main categories. The first is defense.
What?
Okay, so there's a reason government spending as a percent of GDP is important. So let's say the United States earns $100, right?
Stop. I don't need you to explain to me that the average percentage of the revenue that the government collects is always about 17% of GDP. That's not relevant. The relevant part isn't that our GDP can influence the taxes from the government. Obviously, a flourishing economy means the government collect more tax revenues. That's obviously true.
No, the issue is no. The specific issue is
hold on. No. Because what everybody to say is retarded and completely irrelevant. And it's just another well, actually, you type in chat for no fucking reason.
It's not a well, actually.
It's totally irrelevant. The point is that Ben Shapiro is making it sound like we spend 2% of our budget he said 2% of our GDP on defense. That's a retarded fucking point, and that's not what people complain about. And
no, that is a very, very important point. Okay, so you understand that if government if our taxes are equal to our government expenditure, our GDP doesn't change, right? Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So
because GDP is a calculation of all the money spent, an investment in all these different components, and if the government is taxing it, then it takes the money in so that it's not spent. But if the government spending expenditure is the same thing as our GDP, then that means that it would be a wash, right? Yes.
Yes, yeah. And so if you're trying to compare how much we're spending over time and compared to other things that we're doing, it's important to look at government expenditure on each individual program as a percentage of GDP.
That's fine. You're going into a whole bunch of shit that doesn't matter, that I don't care about, that say, well, actually, when we're talking about the United States budget, we don't budget in a percentage of GDP. Now, maybe I've missed
yes, we do budget as a percentage of GDP because there's only so much of the United States productive force that you can budget without having economic impacts.
Then DM me a single article ever of a budget negotiation that talked about a percentage of GDP being spent for any of the public conversations, for any of the Congress conversations, and then I'll believe you. Shoot me a DM of it, and I'll see it, okay? Or even a Ben Shapiro talking about this in the past, and I'll believe it, okay? I want to see you either link me an article where a congressman says, even though this budget might seem high, as a percentage of GDP, it's actually in line with our prior budgets, because that doesn't happen, number one. Or number two.
Because the public conversation that happens around how budgets should actually work is irrelevant to how budgets actually need to work.
But Ben Shapiro is having a conversation, public conversation about the budget. Here's a second thing you could send me. I want you to send me a thing where Ben Shapiro says, now I know that it seems like our non-discretionary spending or our entitlements are high. However, as a percentage of GDP, they're about in line where they always have been, or they're lower than what they've always have been. So if you can show me either of those things, then I'll say, okay, that was a good well, actually. Otherwise, it's a retarded fuck point. That has nothing to do with the fucking video. So show me either of those things and I'll believe you, okay? So a video of Ben Shapiro going, well, actually, as a percentage of GDP, our entitlement spending is really low. Whereas a percentage of GDP, our Ukrainian aid or whatever is really low, rather than this is 50% of our budget or this is 100% of our tax revenues. Okay, show me that, okay? Just send me the DM and I'll believe you. Okay.
So presumably you can get rid of some of the golden toilets at the Pentagon. The second is non-defense discretionary spending, which includes everything else, which is funding for NASA, farm programs, housing assistance, and on and on. It's about $950 billion.
Why does Destiny hate Rage Pope so much? Because Rage Pope comes in and does the most retarded, irrelevant, well-actuallys. Like, technically, what Ben Shapiro is talking about, if we were having a good faith discussion on economics, technically, what Ben Shapiro is talking about has a large degree of truth to it. Maybe even it is a true statement, I would say. But in reality, you will never, ever hear a conservative talk about entitlement spending as a percentage of GDP ever. You will always hear about it in absolute numbers or as a percentage of our debt or as a percentage of, like, the total government budget. So when they're talking about things that they want to keep spending on, they'll talk about it as a percentage of GDP because that percentage is really low. But when they talk about things that they don't want to spend, all of a sudden it becomes 100% of our budget or 200% of our discretionary spending is spent on blah, blah, blah. That's the bullshit that I'm talking about. Okay. So to come in here and have like the most absolute good faith charitable interpretation of a guy who just lied out his ass about impacts of tariffs on the economy is beyond fucking retarded. It's just another well actually. And Rage Pope dumps these into chat all the fucking time. Like the most retarded well actuallys ever. Right. I'll say some shit like, yeah, if you eat 3,000 calories a day, you know, you weigh 120 pounds, you're probably not going to gain weight. And fucking Rage Pope will be in here. You'll be like, well, actually, Destiny, I know a friend who eats 3,000 calories a day and they throw half of it up at the end of the day and he's actually losing weight. So what you're saying is completely fucking wrong because you can be bulimic and you'll be like, okay, yeah, is that true? Sure, but it's fucking retarded, okay? He does these all the time, all right? Jesus.
So unless they're willing to touch some of the actual mandatory programs, unlikely they're going to be able to cut all that much. However, Trump's overall economic plans are to cut in particular areas to allow people to keep their own money and to use again. If tariffs are the main thing that people...
Yeah, hold on. So somebody in chat said it. I think talking about it this way is okay if you talk about every budget item in the conversation in the same way. Yes, that's why I said, show me Ben Shapiro talking about entitlement spending as a percentage of GDP, right? That's, I would be curious to see that. I don't think he's ever done it. I think they always use the big numbers. Or the national debt as a percentage of GDP or something. Maybe, sure.
Unlikely they're going to be able to cut all that much. However, Trump's overall economic plans are to cut in particular areas to allow people to keep their own money and to use again. If tariffs are the main thing that people are worried about in terms of inflationary policy, understand Donald Trump's purpose in using tariffs is as leverage. Even the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, which is very anti-tariff and very pro-free trade, acknowledges that that's probably what Donald Trump is trying to do. They point out the president-elect issued a broadside Monday on Truth Social vowing 25% tariffs against all goods from Mexico and Canada and a new 10% tariff on imports from China. And then he said, quote, this tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Now, again, That is not him making a claim that tariffs are going to help the American economy. That is him making a claim that tariffs can be wielded as a tool of policy. This is part and parcel of his broader approach to foreign policy, which suggests that economic leverage is a very, very important part of getting other countries, America's geopolitical opponents, competitors, and enemies, to do what we want them to do.
That while that is kind of true, there's also a macro convo here that we're not even ready to have because conservatives are fucking mind fucked. But the macro conversation here is that how we want to be negotiating with our allies? Like, do we want to go to Canada and Mexico? I guess we view Mexico as enemies now. I don't fucking know. But do we want to go to Canada like, hey, we should renegotiate a better trade agreement? So we're going to go ahead and tariff all your shit by 30% unless you bend the knee and, do exactly what we want you to do. Like, is that a good approach to dealing with allies? Like,
listen, there are always people trying to take advantage of the United States. Trump is fighting back against that, and there are always people trying to take advantage of you, which is why we should talk about privacy. A few decades ago, private citizens used to be largely that, private. The internet changed everything, folks. Think about everything. You browsed, searched for, watched, tweeted. Now imagine all that data being crawled, collected, aggregated by data brokers into a permanent public record, your record. Having your private life exposed for others to see was once something only celebrities worried about, but in 2024, when everyone is online, everyone is essentially a public figure. You know who absolutely loves this new reality? The radical left. Big tech, big government, they would love to track every single move you make online.
Not to mention that all of this criticizing is being done to Trump's own trade agreement. Keep in mind that all of these threats of tariffs, again, and how meaningless is your word as an American negotiator, right? Imagine going up to Canada and going like, hey, what's up, Canada? They're like, hey, what's up? And you're like, so we're going to tariff the fuck out of you if you don't change these provisions of our trade agreement. And they're like, didn't we just literally renegotiate one of the largest trade agreements in the world? I think the largest free market or the largest market in the world. Didn't we just renegotiate this like 4 or 5 years ago? And it's like, yeah, but we're just going to ignore all of that and we want a totally radically new thing. Is that how these negotiations are going to go? That every few years we're just going to radically renegotiate or throw out every possible thing it's just insane. What an insane position to have in terms of how you relate to other countries. Jesus.
Browsing history, your location, your private information. They would love all of it in their databases. Well, this is one of the reasons I use ExpressVPN every day and why you should as well. Here's how it works. The easiest way for data brokers to track you is through your device's IP address. With ExpressVPN, your IP address is hidden. No more tracking, no more monitoring, no more monetizing your private data. ExpressVPN encrypts 100% of my network data, keeping my data safe from prying eyes. Unlike government programs, it actually works efficiently. Just tap one of your devices and you are now protected. Right now, you can take advantage of ExpressVPN's Black Friday Cyber Monday offer. Get the absolute best VPN deal you will find all year long. Use my special link, expressvpn.com/Ben. Get 4 extra months with the 12-month plan or 6 extra months with the 24-month plan, totally free. That's expressvpn.com/Ben. Get an extra 4 or even 6 months of ExpressVPN for free. Also, a majority of Gen Z supports left-wing policies like open borders and socialism. If we don't reach them and change their minds, the country we know could be lost forever. PragerU is the leading nonprofit when it comes to influencing young people. As we've been working.
Imagine if you wanted to trade with the United States and the U.S. was demanding you to make substantial changes to your market in order to trade. They say okay, you guys need a minimum wage of $4 an hour. We're not going to trade with slave labor anymore. It's not fair. It's hurting our manufacturers too much. You're like, okay, fine. And then they change it. If you were that country, would you start to make dramatic changes thinking well, fuck, I don't know. In 4 years, the United States might completely 180 on this trade agreement. They might change it completely. So I don't know.
Close to the PragerU for open borders and socialism. If we don't reach them and change their minds, the country we know could be lost forever. Open borders and socialism for free. Also, a majority of Gen Z supports left-wing policies like open borders and socialism. If we don't reach them and change their minds, the country we know could be lost forever. PragerU is the leading nonprofit when it comes to influencing young people. Listen, we've been working closely with PragerU for legitimately years. We used to share office space with them. They do amazing.
But calling Trump a Nazi is too much. But open borders and socialism is definitely the goal of the whole Democratic Party.
Amazing work. PragerU's educational, entertaining, pro-American videos meet young people where they are online and opens their minds to the truth. But they need your help. Go to PragerU.com, make a tax-deductible donation. Whatever you give right now will be tripled and have 3 times the impact. Donate $10, it triples to 30. Give $100, it triples to $300. PragerU is 100% free to everyone. No fees, no subscriptions. They don't rely on ads or clickbait headlines. Contrary to what the left says, PragerU is not funded by a handful of billionaires. It's funded by people just like you. In order to keep making great content, reaching millions and changing minds, PragerU needs your help. Please make a 100% tax-deductible donation at PragerU.com today. Your gift will be tripled. Again, they do amazing work. We've been working with them for years. I personally vouch for PragerU. They are awesome. Go check them out right now. PragerU.com. Donate generously. As the Wall Street Journal points out, the tariff here is in service of Trump's campaign promise to reduce illegal migration and fentanyl smuggling. He vows to take unilateral executive action without any explicit legal rationale. Trump is threatening the countries, including 2 neighbors and allies, with economic harm if they don't help him solve a domestic U.S. problem. Now, again, that's the Wall Street Journal being very skeptical, but the reality is fentanyl is not just. This is where the Wall Street Journal is wrong. Fentanyl is not just a U.S. domestic problem. Not remotely. I've been down to the border. I've seen the areas where Mexican drug cartels are smuggling fentanyl over the border. They're wide open. It is a massive business for the Mexican drug cartels, and they are working with China. China has been sending over
most of the fentanyl that comes into the United States is put into legally traveling people, by the way, but okay. But I think he thinks it's like the Fast and Furious. They have tunnels and the guy that hit the telephone pole and not John Cena, the other guy, Vin Diesel are driving cars through tunnels and flying through the air to get the fucking fentanyl across to us.
Precursor agents for the making of fentanyl. They send them over to labs that are run by Chinese scientists in Mexico to then cook up all of those
Paul Walker, yeah,
precursors into fentanyl, and then those are shipped across the border in many cases to even Chinese distributors on the other side of the border. This is a foreign policy problem. It is not merely a domestic policy problem. As the Wall Street Journal points out, he tried a version of this in his first term to coerce Mexico into assisting him in better policing the border, and he liked the result. Mexico went along with the Remain in Mexico program that held migrants on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande while they awaited asylum rulings. Okay, now, again, that is correct. That is what Trump is actually did asylum rulings, along with the Remain in Mexico program that held migrants on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande while they awaited asylum rulings. Okay, now, again, that is correct. That is what Trump is actually doing. And I think that all of the worries that what he's attempting to do is remake the entire global trading system, that's a lot of rot. Look at the people he's actually appointing to high positions of economic power in his administration. Scott Bessent is not somebody who's going to simply erect Smoot-Hawley tariffs. It was like the 1930 tariffs that helped exacerbate the Great Depression. He's not. Donald Trump wants to win. He does not want high inflation, and he does not want low growth, both of which would be the impact of massive across-the-board tariffs without any reference to concessions from the other side. You're already, by the way, seeing the impact. So, for example, Mexico is now getting cold feet over a new Chinese electric vehicle plant after Donald Trump's win. This is according to the Wall Street Journal. Chinese electric vehicle maker BYD is finalizing plans for a factory in Mexico, a push that will test Donald Trump's trade policies and the Mexican government's appetite for conflict with the president-elect. BYD officials say the company is aiming to reach a deal with Mexico state officials to break ground on a factory near one of the automotive hubs in central or northern Mexico.
Wait, would our trade agreements even affect these things though? Because isn't the whole point of the U.S. Mexico Canada trade agreement to get parts that are made in Mexico, Canada, or the United States? This wouldn't even be impacted by if Canada or if China was building the factory in Mexico. No, like what?
The plans put Mexico in a dilemma made worse by Trump's threats to impose a 25% tariff on Mexican goods.
Oh, we're just going to tariff our. We're just going to tariff our trading partners. My bad. It wasn't about things from China. It's going to be everybody. What? We should just put tariffs on the fucking states. Like, why not just do that, right? Jesus Christ.
BYD rivals Tesla as the biggest electric vehicle maker in the world. That's largely because, of course, BYD supplies to Chinese citizens and to people who are associated with Chinese markets. There's a major security risk with BYD, by the way. Again, Chinese technology is loaded with monitoring and intelligence gathering operations. This is why TikTok is a Chinese op. Okay, the same thing is true with regard to BYD. Having a lot of BYD cars driving American roads would actually be a rather large security problem. Mexican officials fear a BYD plant would send the wrong message to Trump and trade hawks around him by suggesting that Mexico wants to be a backdoor for Chinese companies to sell to Americans. Mexico says it is not aiming to be a conduit for Chinese-made goods and has made strides in addressing illegal immigration. It needs to persuade both the U.S. and Canada of that when talks begin next year on extending the USMCA.
Wow, what percentage of Tesla's batteries do you think are bought from BYD? Fucking AI answers.
Mexico has to present itself with a business card that says reliable partner of North America, said Eduardo Solis, a consultant who previously led Mexico's Automotive Industry Association.
It's an EU
That
thing?
is exactly right. So Trump is already getting wins out of all this. Now, it's possible that Mexico could decide to shoot itself directly in the foot. After all, their elected president, a woman named Claudia Sheinbaum, who is essentially a socialist. She is the former deputy to Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, who is a very socialistic, extremely left-wing leader of Mexico, who is in hock with the drug cartels. They're all in hock with the drug cartels, the government of Mexico, because the drug cartels control the border. Well, Sheinbaum says that she's going to tariff American goods going to Mexico. Well, I mean, good luck with that. I'm sorry. The American market for Mexican goods is far larger than the Mexican market for American goods. Apparently, according to Sheinbaum, she sent a Tuesday letter to Trump saying among Mexico's main exporters to the United States are
U.S. largest exporters. Mexico is our... What a fucking stupid statement. Mexico is our second largest export market. Why would he make that compare? This is what I mean. This is why I hate people like Rage Pope, who are like, well, actually, it doesn't make sense. Like, is it technically true that Mexico imports a lot more from us than they export to us? Sure, but they're our second largest export market, which makes sense also because we have a huge market agreement between all of us. Like, Jesus Christ. Aren't these the trading partners that you want to keep? If Trump is so fucking obsessed with our export and import, our trade deficits, aren't people that we have like positive deficits with or whatever, negative deficits, I don't know how to say, aren't these the trading partners we want to keep? Sometimes I feel like if you're a conservative commentator who's like decently intelligent, it's like playing ad libs or something, or it's like, okay, here's the news today, here's the challenge. You have to spin this in a way that makes it seem like Trump really knows what he's doing and it's actually a good policy, okay?
tariff American goods going to Mexico. Well, I mean, good luck with that. I'm sorry. The American market for Mexican goods is far larger than the Mexican market for American goods. Apparently, according to Sheinbaum, she sent a Tuesday letter to Trump saying among Mexico's main exporters to the United States are General Motors, Stellantis, and Ford Motor Company, which arrived in Mexico 80 years ago. Why impose a tariff that would jeopardize them? Such a measure would be unacceptable.
Not to... it's just stupid in so many ways. If you truly really wanted to fuck China in the ass, if you're like, fuck China, fuck their exports, we're going to fucking destroy these motherfuckers, then your goal should be building out your North American trading area as much as possible. Like, we should be championing plants being built in Mexico and in Canada. And maybe we could even incorporate some Central American fucking countries into shit like this. I don't know. I'm sure Costa Rica or Honduras or Belize or some of these people should be, maybe possibly. Like, this should be the trading market that we're trying to build, that we want to succeed. Why are you trying to fuck over your largest import and export markets when you're trying to compete with the largest exporter in the world? Like, how fucking stupid is such a...
acceptable and would lead to inflation and job losses in both the United States and Mexico. Well, if you don't want that, see, here's the thing about tariffs. What Trump is doing is playing a game of chicken. The thing about playing a game of chicken with someone who's widely
You're playing a chicken with your own allies, though. Why would you do this?
perceived as a radical, like a crazy person, which is the way the world perceives Trump, is you don't want to play chicken with the guy who's willing to go over the cliff. Right? That is not the game you want to play. So is Mexico going to blink? I think they will, especially when faced with the prospect of American markets closing to Mexican goods. Justin Trudeau is also going to be bullied into taking positions that are less antithetical to American interests. Apparently, Justin Trudeau, handsome Bernie Sanders, and Taylor Swift dancer, said he spoke to Donald Trump on Monday after the president's-elect shared plans to use his first day in office to slap 25% tariffs on Canada. Trudeau said it was a good call. We obviously talked about laying out the facts, talking about how intense and effective connections between our two countries flow back and forth. So again, the move would hit more than $400 billion worth of annual Canadian exports to the United States. And it's all about, apparently, stressing that border security is their top priority. Again, even the Canadian socialists are recognizing they need to comply with Donald Trump's actual policy desires here. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc then released a statement Monday night stressing border security is their top priority. And throwing America's weight around in the world is generally a very, very good thing. That is a good thing. And so President Trump, the idea that he's going to create mass inflation through tariffs, it is all a leverage play. Donald Trump loves leverage and he loves to use leverage. And
it's like imagine what we're saying here. It's the leverage play. Like, imagine I'm the most valuable employee at a company and I go up to my boss, okay? And I'm like, all right, motherfucker, I want a raise. I want you to give me a 15 an hour raise increase and I want a $10,000 bonus or I'm going to kill myself, okay? I'm a master negotiator, by the way.
By the way, the same media that was cheering Joe Biden for relieving the student loan debt, which is an inflationary measure, because again, it is the government simply paying off people's debts willy-nilly, that's going to go away. Because it's an inflationary measure because cheering Joe loves leverage and he loves to use leverage. And by the way, the same media that was cheering Joe Biden for relieving the student loan debt, which is an inflationary measure, because again, it is the government simply paying off people's debts willy-nilly, that's going to go away because Donald
Wait. I hate it. It's not even funny, really. It's boring. This is boring. Okay, so a tax cut where you let people keep more of their money, that's not inflationary because it's letting people keep their money. But paying off their student loan debt, which is just another form of payment to the government, that would be inflationary. In what world can we have both of these things be true? So when the government pays off debt, which is the government just saying you can keep your money, by the way. If you're a student now, you can keep more of your money. That's inflationary for giving student loan debt. But for giving taxes or lessening tax burdens, that's not inflationary because it's people's own money. Like,
Sure, because again, it is the government simply paying off people's debts willy-nilly. That's going to go away because Donald Trump is poised to pull the plug.
It's because private individuals make more sound market moves that improve the economy. They've got motion and the government doesn't.
On Biden's years-long push to cancel student loan debt for tens of millions of people. According to Politico, his transition advisors and outside allies have been discussing ways to quickly unwind the various Biden-era initiatives that offer new or easier paths to loan forgiveness for borrowers, according to two people familiar with the discussions. That's something that's going to be difficult and complicated, but that is going to be pursued by the new Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. And this is now going to flow throughout the American economy. Mark Andreessen, the investor, he says, can't you feel the energy being unleashed in the system? You absolutely can. Right? The pedal is to the metal on the American economy. Here, for example, is the Walmart CEO acknowledging that it's time for a DEI rollback. It's time to open up the economy along every line.
First, let me say, like many companies all across the United States, we've been on a journey and we continue to be on a journey. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that every customer, every associate feels welcome here to shop and to feel like they belong. And that term belong, we've been talking about belonging now for almost 2 years. Early 2023, we started talking about belonging. And we're going to continue to make the best decisions we can that makes everyone, our customers, our associates.
Okay, but what is your argument against Shapiro's idea that cutting taxes is not inflationary? Of course it is. He's ignoring. There's a concept called the fungibility of money, and he's just ignoring it. Fungibility money just means that, like, let's say that I give you $10, but I don't want you to spend it on drugs. I only want you to spend it on food. Okay, that doesn't really work. Even if you earmark that $10 for food, okay, well I'm going to go ahead and spend $10 on food, but now the $10 that I would have spent on food, I'm going to spend it on drugs. Right? It doesn't really work that way. The money is fungible. You know, a dollar spent somewhere could be spent somewhere else. So when he says that like a tax cut doesn't lead to inflation, well, if you don't pair it with a spending cut, all you're doing is just spending more money with the government, right? If before the government was spending $10 and they were taxing you $5, and then the government goes down to taxing you only $2, but they still spend $10, well, okay, we've just increased the total amount of money in circulation. Like, you have to pair it with spending cuts. Otherwise, it's just more government spending.
I feel like this is an environment they can shop in and thrive in.
Okay, so that is him saying, by the way, that they're going to roll back a lot of the DEI initiatives that they're pushing at Walmart. That's John Furner, the Walmart CEO.
Oh, that was code for, okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Like, the handcuffs are off the American economy. And when people are worried about Trumpflation, they have to understand Donald Trump is a results-oriented person. He has always been a results-oriented person. The last thing he wants is his name on an inflationary policy that results in 5, 6, 7% inflation. He knows full well that crippled Joe Biden's presidency and probably ended the Democratic rule in the White House. So he is.
Oh, and we got through. Oh, wait, did we do it? I'm sorry. I brought this up like an hour ago when we started this video. Did we get through this whole 23-minute video talking about inflation without mentioning COVID? Did that happen? Like, is that...
Not going to make that mistake. Now, meanwhile, he's making more excellent picks. So yesterday, he announced, to my great delight, that he is going to choose Jay Bhattacharya to lead the National Institutes of Health. This is amazing. Again, so many people who were victimized by the so-called deep state in the last administration are now leading the departments that victimized them. This is true of Jay Bhattacharya. So Jay Bhattacharya is a Stanford health policy professor. He, of course, was the author of the so-called Great Barrington Declaration, which we talked about at length on the show at the time. It called for ending lockdowns and isolating the vulnerable so everybody who's young and healthy could go back into the workforce, because his point, which was correct, is that young, healthy people getting COVID weren't going to die, at least in very large numbers. And so the idea that we should lock down entire populations was totally wrong. Anthony Fauci attempted to quash Bhattacharya, directed government resources.
It's okay, but Ben's counter is that if the government cuts taxes that is spent by private individuals, but government spending is spent by public individuals, I'm just asking you to clarify because there is a clear kill shot for this retard take that you should know since he brought it up last time we talked to him. I don't understand what is more of a kill shot than just what he's saying is retarded. If you cut taxes, you're decreasing the income from the government. And if the government is spending the same amount of money, then it needs to borrow more money. For every dollar that you don't pay in taxes, the government is borrowing another dollar from the Treasury in order to, or the Treasury is borrowing from the Federal Reserve. The government has to borrow more to spend. It's more deficit spending. That's all it is. It's 1-to-1. I don't know how you can make it more simple than that.
Versus to be used at quashing Bhattacharya. Well, now he is going to be heading up the NIH, a $47 billion agency that funds much of the nation's basic research into underlying causes of infectious and other diseases. This is excellent. Bhattacharya has called for overhauling the agency. His proposals include more studies that repeat other studies, which is absolutely necessary. There's a massive duplication crisis in science in which people issue a study. That study may be what they call p-hacks, which means that they're actually changing the internal measurements used in order to achieve what's called statistical significance, to show that the study is important or useful. P-hacking means that a bad study becomes a titularly good study. And then it's very difficult to duplicate. And because there's no interest, nobody gets paid for duplicating somebody else's study. It's a major problem. You have a bad result that's floating around for decades at a time and used as the basis for public policy.
I don't think that p-hacking is the number one reason why there's a replication crisis across a lot of scientific disciplines. I don't even know if that is necessarily the correct P-hacking, I guess, can encompass a variety of things. Let me hear him describe this again. This doesn't even matter. No one gives a fuck. Hold on.
What's called statistical significance, to show that the study is important. Bhattacharya has called for overhauling the agency. His proposals include more studies that
Fuck me, I hate this. Fuck! I hate this guy and I hate this conversation.
repeat other studies, which is absolutely necessary. There's a massive duplication crisis in science in which people issue a study. That study may be what they call p-hacks, which means that they're actually changing the internal measurements used in order to achieve what's called statistical significance, to show that the study is important or useful.
Statistical significance is an aspect of what shows that a study is important. I guess I'm being really nitpicky now. I don't even know what he's describing p-hacking to be. You change the internal measure. I could argue maybe he's just like saying he's simplifying it for audiences, I guess.
Useful. P-hacking means that a bad study becomes a titularly good study.
P-hacking doesn't necessarily make a bad study a good study. There should be ways to tease this out. There should be ways to figure out if this has happened. Like, for instance, this is just one example of p-hacking. There's a million different things. I think there's different ways you can manipulate data to tell you different things. But like, you should have a clear hypothesis for a study before you begin data collection, right? Statistically significant difference just means that there's like you have a 95% confidence interval that the result of something lies between a value that is not encompassing the null hypothesis of a given study. It's not relevant. But like, if I collect data on 100 individuals, right, and I don't have a clear direction for my study, or if I don't have a clear like thing where I'm like, oh, I want to measure people's sleep habits. If I just collect a whole bunch of fucking data from 100 different people, I can probably look across like 100 different variables and find something weird about it and then like publish that. I believe that would count as like one example of p-hacking. And I think there are other examples of ways that you can do this. But a lot of the replication crisis has to do with like, how do you fund research? How do grants work? What does the peer review process look like? It's not just p-hacking. Like, just like to say that it's p-hacking is what causes the replication crisis is absurd. I think is an absurd simplification and doesn't even get us towards having a good conversation about how to fix, like peer-reviewed, published research, but whatever.
And then it's very difficult to duplicate, and because there's no interest, nobody gets paid for duplicating somebody else's study. It's a major problem. You have a bad result that's floating around for decades at a time and used as the basis for public policy. This, by the way, is what happened to lead to, for example, the 6-foot rule on COVID. It was based on absolutely nothing. It was based on like old flu studies from the 1950s that had never really been duplicated, and particularly not with COVID. Well, Bhattacharya is going to actually spend time and money duplicating studies, so we know that we get good results. He says this is how you turn the NIH from something that is sort of how to control society into something that's aimed at the discovery of truth to improve the health of Americans.
Okay. Surprisingly, his suggestion there actually wasn't that bad. If you want to spend money, if you want to literally allocate money just to replicate studies, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, because we do need money for that. And it's very unsexy research. Nobody like wants to be involved in replicating studies. Like that's very boring and not cool. And you're not going to usually discover awesome stuff, and publishing it is boring. And